Welcome back to the Deep Dive.
It's great to be back.
Today we're heading into occult archives,
Yeah.
where we kind of explore the books that maybe you don't hear about all the time.
Right, not your top 10 list.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
But books that have a lot of kind of mystery and maybe a little bit of fear associated with them.
Yeah, definitely. Like the kind of things that make people really wonder, what's in these books?
Right. And so this is episode 221,
Okay.
Psychic Self-Defense, a manual for protection in the unseen realms.
All right.
And this one, what's interesting about this one is it's not just theory. This author actually claims to have some practical experience in this.
That's right. Yeah, he actually had an experience of a psychic attack that really set him on this path.
Wow.
Which is, a pretty intense way to get started.
Definitely. So we're gonna kind of deep dive into this this book and the concept of psychic attack, what that means, and then how to defend against it.
Yeah, looking at what the author thought was happening and the advice he has for staying safe.
Okay, great. So let's jump in. How common does this author think these types of attacks are?
Well, right off the bat, he says they're way more common than people think.
Oh,
Even people, who are into the occult. But he says there's a big problem getting people to talk about it.
oh, that makes sense.
Imagine trying to explain to someone you think you've been psychically attacked.
Yeah,
I mean, people would think you're crazy.
definitely.
So, I can see why people wouldn't want to come forward with that.
Yeah. He also says that the experience itself, like even the idea of it, is so disturbing.
Oh, yeah. The idea that someone's messing with your very self, like your personality,
Right.
it's terrifying. So people just don't even want to think about it, let alone talk about it.
Right. And he kind of connects this to the historical fear of witches.
Exactly, yeah.
Right.
I mean, think about it. The witch hunts.
Right.
A lot of that was fueled by this fear that someone could use these invisible powers to hurt you.
Right.
And that fear is still around today, even if we don't call them witches anymore.
Right. It's just kind of the method and maybe the terminology has changed,
Yeah,
but the basic fear is still there.
it's still there.
Okay. So he also talks about this interesting example of Mrs. Eddy.
Oh, right. The founder of Christian Science. He makes an interesting point about her.
Right.
He thinks she was using these mental powers. Maybe she didn't even fully understand how they worked, but she was definitely using them.
Oh, interesting. So, but she was only using them for good. Is that what he's saying?
Yeah, and he thinks that's why she was so concerned about what she called malicious animal magnetism.
Oh, right.
She knew how powerful these techniques could be, and she didn't want them to be used for harm.
It's kind of a responsibility that comes with it seems.
It is, it's like having this tool, this power, and you have to be careful with it.
Right.
You have to use it wisely.
And then he kind of leads this into the New Thought movement, which is kind of like a secularization of this.
Yeah, it took those ideas about the power of thought, but instead of focusing on spiritual goals, it was more about achieving worldly success.
Okay.
Things like, improving your salesmanship, becoming more popular, attracting a partner, getting rich. It was like taking those occult ideas and applying them to everyday life.
So it's less mystical and more practical.
Much more practical, yeah.
Right.
And he even has some examples of this, advertisements from a magazine back then.
Oh, wow. Like real advertisements.
Yeah, like you could learn how to transfer your thoughts using telepathy or mental radio, whatever that is.
That's pretty out there.
Right. And they promise to help you with anything. Your health, your love life, your finances.
Wow. And people believe this.
Well, enough to buy these courses and products, I guess. There was one ad that really caught my eye.
What's that?
Instant hypnotism. Yeah, supposedly you could learn to hypnotize anyone, like instantly.
That's kind of scary, actually.
It is a little bit, isn't it? Especially if it fell into the wrong hands.
Right. Yeah.
But it just shows you how widespread these ideas were. People were really fascinated by the power of the mind.
Right. So I guess the question that he poses to the reader is, what happens when someone uses this for less than good purposes?
Exactly. What if someone learns all these techniques and then decides to use them to get what they want, regardless of who gets hurt?
Right. And especially if they're really good at it.
Exactly. He basically says that anyone who doesn't know how to defend themselves becomes fair game.
So it's almost like a weapon.
In a way, yeah, an invisible weapon that most people don't even know exists.
Right. And so he talks about his own experiences with this with being attacked, right?
Yeah, he has a couple of stories. The first one, he was working for this guy, and the boss was trying to get rid of his superior,
Mhm.
and he was trying to convince everyone that this guy was no good. Right.
And the weird thing is, the author found himself agreeing with all these accusations.
Really? Even though they were made up.
Yeah, even though he knew this guy was a good worker, he later realized it was a kind of mental influence.
Wow. And what happened after that?
He was exhausted, like completely drained,
Right.
and he had to sleep for hours.
Okay.
But this time, there was something else, a really strange feeling.
What was that?
When he was leaving the office, he felt like his feet weren't really touching the ground, like he was walking on something unsteady.
Oh, that's weird.
Yeah, and he says that's a sign of your etheric double being messed with.
So the etheric double, just to remind the listeners, that's sort of like this energy body.
Right, like a subtle body that's connected to your physical body.
Okay.
And in occultism, it's thought that this double can be affected by these kinds of attacks.
So it's not just a mental thing.
Not just mental, no.
It's actually like affecting this energy field.
Affecting your energy, yeah.
Wow. But it didn't end there, did it? No, it got worse. He ended up collapsing.
Oh, no.
And he couldn't remember anything about the interview.
Oh, wow.
But even though he couldn't remember what happened, he was filled with this overwhelming fear.
Like just pure dread.
Pure dread, yeah. Dry mouth, sweating palms. His heart was pounding so hard it was shaking the bed.
Oh, that's terrible.
It was bad. His friends had to come rescue him.
Oh, wow. And so what did he do? How did he recover from this?
Well, it was a long process.
Oh.
First, he had to force himself to remember what happened, and that was really painful.
Oh, I can imagine.
And even after he remembered, he was still weak for months,
Right.
like just completely drained.
So this really took a toll on him.
Oh, yeah, a huge toll.
Okay. And he describes it as like damage to his etheric double.
Right, like it was leaking this vital energy, what occultists call prana.
Okay.
And he says he didn't fully recover until he went through an initiation into an occult order.
Really?
Yeah, within an hour of the ceremony, he felt this huge shift, and the attacks stopped.
So that's really interesting that that an occult ritual could heal him like that.
It is interesting.
Okay. So from these experiences, he really started to see the connection between psychology and occultism.
Yeah, he realized they were two sides of the same coin.
Right.
You know, you can't really understand one without the other.
And then he started working with other people who thought they were under attack.
Exactly.
And so what did their experiences tell him?
Well, they confirmed what he had already learned, but they also showed him that these attacks could take many different forms.
Oh, okay.
And he started to find more evidence of this everywhere he looked, in folklore, in old accounts of witch trials, even in some works of fiction.
So he's really building this whole understanding of this phenomena.
He is, yeah. He's piecing together this puzzle using his own experiences and what he's learning from others.
Wow. Okay. So he says that we're normally kind of protected from these unseen forces.
Right. We have this kind of natural shield, like a veil that separates us from the unseen world.
Okay.
But he says there are times when that veil can be torn.
And when is that?
Well, there are a few different ways it can happen. Sometimes it's the place. You know, certain places are just charged with these forces, like old battlefields or places where a lot of intense emotions have been focused.
Right. So like an environmental factor.
Yeah, exactly. Other times, it's the people you're around.
Oh, okay.
If you're spending time with people who are actively working with these forces, you're more likely to be exposed to them.
That makes sense.
And then there's deliberate exploration.
Oh, right. Like people who are specifically trying to contact these forces.
Exactly. And sometimes people go too far, you know, they get in over their heads before they're really ready.
Right. So it's like they're opening a door they don't know how to close.
Exactly. And the last way he mentions is pathological conditions.
Oh, right.
Like sometimes when someone's really sick, their defenses can weaken.
So it's almost like their immune system is compromised.
Exactly, yeah. So basically, there are a lot of ways that we can become vulnerable to these forces.
Right. So before you even think about defending yourself, you have to know what you're dealing with.
Right. He's really big on diagnosis.
Right.
You know, figuring out what kind of attack you're facing, because the wrong defense can be useless.
Okay. And so what's the most common kind of attack that he sees?
Well, he says most of the time it's coming from another person.
Oh, okay.
Just someone with an ignorant or malignant mind.
And what does he mean by ignorant?
Well, he says not all attacks are deliberate.
Okay.
Sometimes people can harm others with their thoughts and emotions without even realizing it.
Okay.
Like, imagine someone who's really angry and negative all the time.
Yeah.
Their energy can be really draining to be around, and that can be harmful, even if they don't mean it to be.
So it's like a secondhand smoke almost.
In a way, yeah. It's like their negativity is polluting the atmosphere around them. And he also says that sometimes the person who seems to be attacking you might actually be a victim themselves.
Oh, okay. How does that work?
Well, he gives this example. Imagine two people holding hands, and one of them steps on a live wire.
Okay.
They both get shocked, right?
Right.
Even though only one of them actually touched the wire.
Right.
So sometimes the person who seems to be attacking you might just be a conduit for some other force.
Oh, interesting. Okay. So he also mentions some kind of strange outward signs that might indicate an attack.
Right, so some really weird stuff.
Yeah, like what?
Well, he talks about these evil odors.
Evil odors.
Yeah, like the smell of rotting flesh. Or like this one time he was doing a ritual and the whole place suddenly smelled like sewage. Yeah, not pleasant.
Okay.
And then there's this thing he calls precipitation of slime.
That sounds even worse.
Yeah, this one's a bit more out there. He hasn't seen it himself, but he says there are reports of this slime appearing out of nowhere. Yeah, like trails of it or big smears. And sometimes even giant footprints like elephant tracks.
Inside.
Inside, yeah.
That is really weird.
It is, right. But he says it's a real phenomenon.
Okay. So now let's shift gears a little bit and talk about the subconscious mind. Because he talks a lot about how suggestion plays a role in these attacks.
Yeah, he's really big on the power of the subconscious mind.
Right.
He says it's like this vast hidden world that's constantly influencing our thoughts and actions.
Right.
And he explains how we can work with it to defend ourselves.
Okay. How so?
Well, one of the key things he talks about is mental imagery.
Okay.
Like, if you're trying to overcome a fear, for example, you have to create a clear picture in your mind of what you want to achieve.
Right.
Not just tell yourself, don't be afraid, because the subconscious mind doesn't really register negatives.
So it's more about focusing on the positive.
Exactly. Like, imagine yourself being brave and confident, really see it, feel it, and that's how you start to reprogram your subconscious.
Okay. So how does this apply to psychic attacks?
Well, he says that harmful suggestions need fertile ground to take root.
Okay.
Like, if someone's trying to influence you, their suggestions will only work if they find something to latch onto in your own subconscious mind.
So if you have a strong and healthy subconscious mind.
Then you're less likely to be affected. It's like trying to plant a seed in concrete.
Right.
It's not going to grow.
But what if someone's really good at this, like really skilled? Can they force someone to do something against their will?
That's a tough question. He says that, generally speaking, you can't be hypnotized to do something that goes completely against your true nature.
Okay.
But then he asks, what is our true nature, really?
Right.
I mean, are we really as civilized as we like to think? Or are we just suppressing our primal instincts?
So there's this potential for our darker side to be accessed.
He seems to think so, yeah. He says that with enough suggestion, anyone can be influenced to do almost anything.
Wow. So what are these points of entry, these gates, as he calls them, where these attackers try to get in?
He identifies two main ones, the self-preservation instinct and the sex instinct.
Okay.
He says those are the two most powerful drives in human nature, and that any successful attack has to tap into one or both of them.
That makes sense. So if someone's trying to psychically attack you, they're going to try to play on your fears or your desires.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Okay. And so how do they create this this atmosphere on the inner planes, as he calls it?
He says it all starts with the attacker's own state of mind.
Okay.
Like, if they want to do something really harmful, they have to fill themselves with this intense negative emotion. Like, if they're trying to do a psychic murder, they'll focus on rage.
Oh, wow.
And if it's a psychic rape, they'll focus on lust and cruelty.
Oh, that's really disturbing.
It is, isn't it? But that's how they tune into those dark forces.
So their own negativity attracts these other negative entities.
Exactly, yeah.
Oh.
And he mentions these demonic figures like Uriel and Azrael and Ammon.
Oh, right. Those are like angels, but fallen angels, right?
Right. But he's careful to point out that these entities don't directly attack the victim.
Okay.
They work through the attacker.
So they're like amplifying the attacker's power.
Exactly. He compares it to, remember that game Nuts in May?
Oh, yeah, where you try to break through each other's chains.
Right.
Okay.
So he says the real pressure isn't on the person at the end of the chain.
Right.
It's on the person in the middle who's holding the whole thing together.
Okay.
And in the same way, the attacker is the one who's really vulnerable. They're the ones who are opening themselves up to these dark forces.
So there's a risk for the attacker as well.
Definitely, yeah. He even brings up the story of Faust.
Oh, right, the guy who sold his soul to the devil.
Right. So he's saying that even if you get what you want through this kind of psychic attack, you might end up paying a much higher price in the long run.
So it's a dangerous game.
A very dangerous game.
Okay. So he says that telepathic suggestion is kind of at the heart of all occult attacks.
Yeah, he says it's the foundation of it all.
Right.
Doesn't matter what the source is, whether it's a person or an entity. It all comes down to suggestion.
Okay.
And he says that the way these suggestions get in is by piercing the aura.
Right, the aura, that's like the energy field that surrounds us.
Exactly. And he says the aura isn't pierced from the outside, it's pierced from within.
Oh, how does that work?
Well, he says it's our own fear and desire that creates the opening.
Okay.
Like, if we're afraid of something or we really want something, we can actually reach out with our aura and connect with the source of that fear or desire.
So it's like we're inviting it in.
In a way, yeah. And that's how the attacker gets their hooks in.
So the key is to control your emotions.
Exactly. If you can stay calm and centered, your aura will be much stronger.
Okay, so now he talks about some actual cases of psychic attack. Starting with this kind of strange story of Mr. C and Miss X.
Yeah, this is a really interesting one.
Right. So Mr. C, his first wife died of cancer.
Right.
And then he started having these fits, and his second wife started having these weird dreams.
Yeah, and it turns out there's this woman, Miss X, who might be connected to all this.
Okay.
Now, Miss X, she's had a string of bad luck, to say the least.
Oh, yeah.
Her aunt died, her fiancé died, her first lover, her sister's lover.
Wow. That's a lot of loss.
It is. And then she had a mental breakdown.
So what's the connection to Mr. C?
Well, a psychic investigator had looked into Mr. C before all this happened.
Right.
And they said that someone with occult powers was interested in him.
Oh, wow.
And they didn't even know about Miss X at that point.
So it's like they predicted all this.
In a way, yeah.
And so what does the author think is going on here?
Well, he speculates that Miss X might have some kind of past life connection to witchcraft.
Oh, okay.
And that she might be using astral projection to visit Mr. C at night.
Astral projection.
Yeah, that's when you consciously project your consciousness out of your body.
Yeah.
It's a real thing, but it takes a lot of skill and training.
So she's like going to him in her sleep.
Possibly, yeah.
And what about those fits that Mr. C was having? What does he think those were?
He's not sure.
Oh.
He wonders if it was a struggle against her influence, or maybe even a kind of subconscious embrace.
Oh, that's creepy.
It is, isn't it? And he also points out that a lot of this seemed to happen during the Hecate phase of the moon.
And Hecate is the goddess of witchcraft.
Exactly. So there are a lot of strange coincidences here.
Right. And what about those deaths? All those people close to Miss X who died?
He thinks those might be cases of vampirism.
Vampirism, like actual vampires.
Well, not in the traditional sense.
Okay.
But he's talking about psychic vampirism, where someone drains the life force of another person.
And he thinks Miss X was doing this?
He doesn't say for sure, but he thinks it's a possibility. He points out that her fiancé was sick for a long time, but it wasn't a typical case of consumption.
Oh.
And then there were those 3 guys who all wanted to marry her, and they all died under suspicious circumstances.
Wow.
So he's suggesting that there might be more to this than meets the eye.
Right. And so what's his final conclusion about this whole case?
He thinks that Miss X might have been trying to do some kind of magical operation.
Okay.
And that it backfired, causing all this death and her own breakdown.
So it's like a cautionary tale about the dangers of dabbling in magic.
Definitely, yeah. He's saying that these forces are real and they're not to be trifled with.
Right. Okay, and then he talks about this other case, this ultra-sensitive woman he knew.
Oh, right. This woman was Well, she was obsessed with cleanliness.
Really?
Yeah, like she couldn't stand anything that she thought was unclean.
Wow.
And she was really fascinated by violence, but in a kind of morbid way. And the author later realized that this was probably a sign of a repressed sadistic side to her personality.
So it's like she was overcompensating.
Exactly, yeah. And there's this one really interesting detail.
Okay.
She couldn't stand the sight of a silver cross that the author wore.
Really?
Yeah, it made her really uncomfortable. And this cross had been specifically magnetized for protection against psychic attack.
So it's like she was sensitive to its energy.
He thinks so, yeah. Like she could sense its power and it repelled her.
Wow. Okay, so now he talks about the difference between a mental attack and something he calls etheric projection.
Right. He's saying that these are two different types of psychic phenomena.
Okay.
With a mental attack, it's all in the mind.
Right. Yeah.
It's about influencing thoughts and emotions. But with etheric projection, there's something more physical involved.
So it's like there's actual energy being projected.
Yeah, like a force that can interact with the physical world.
Okay. And what can this etheric projection do?
He says it can cause bruises, move objects, even make noises.
Wow.
It's pretty powerful stuff.
Okay. But he says that the mind can't directly manipulate matter.
Right. He's saying that there has to be some kind of intermediary, some kind of vehicle.
Okay.
And in this case, he thinks it's the etheric double.
Right. That energy body we were talking about earlier.
Exactly. So he's saying that if someone's doing something physical at a distance, it's probably their etheric double that's doing it.
So it's like a psychic extension of themselves.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's talk about these artificial elementals. Now, this is where it gets really interesting.
Yeah, this is one of the more fascinating parts of the book, for sure.
So what are these artificial elementals and how are they created?
Well, he says that they're basically thought forms.
Okay.
Like, they're created through the power of imagination.
Okay.
So if you want to create an elemental, you first have to have a really clear picture of it in your mind.
Okay.
And then you have to imbue it with your own energy, your own life force.
And then what?
And then you have to invoke the appropriate natural force.
So it's like you're giving it a body and a soul.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay. And so are these elementals always bad?
No. He says they can be used for good or evil.
No. Okay.
Like, some people believe that guardian angels are a type of artificial elemental.
Really?
Yeah.
That's interesting.
And he also says that sometimes people create elementals unconsciously, like without even realizing it.
Oh, okay.
He gives an example of a mother who's really worried about her children.
Okay.
He says that her fear and anxiety can actually create a thought form that will try to protect them.
Oh, wow.
But he also warns about the dangers of creating elementals, especially if you don't know what you're doing.
Right.
He tells this really vivid story about a time when he accidentally created a werewolf elemental.
A werewolf. Wow.
Yeah, he was feeling really resentful and angry, and he was thinking about the myth of Fenris, the Nordic wolf god.
Okay.
And suddenly he felt this energy being drawn out of him.
Oh,
And this huge wolf materialized next to him on the bed.
oh my God.
Yeah, it's terrifying. And he realized that he had to get control of it before it got out of hand.
So what did he do?
Well, first, he had to let go of the resentment that had created it.
Okay.
Because as long as he was holding on to that anger, the elemental would keep feeding off of it.
Right.
And then he visualized drawing the energy back into himself.
Okay.
And he says it was like sucking lemonade through a straw.
Wow, that's a really vivid image.
Yeah, and as he was doing this, he felt these berserk impulses rising up in himself.
Oh, no.
Like he wanted to just lash out and destroy everything.
So it was almost like the elemental was trying to take him over.
It's possible, yeah. But he managed to resist it.
Wow.
And eventually the wolf just faded away.
That's a pretty intense story.
It is, yeah. And it's a good reminder that these forces are real and they can be dangerous if you don't know how to handle them.
Okay. So let's talk about morbid attachments and psychic vampirism. What are those?
Well, these are basically situations where one person is draining the life force of another.
Like literally draining their energy.
Yeah, it's like a psychic leech.
And how does this happen?
He says it often happens in close relationships,
Okay.
like mother and daughter or two close friends.
Right.
And it's usually the weaker person who's doing the draining.
Oh, okay.
Like they're unconsciously feeding off of the other person's energy.
And what are the signs of this?
The person who's being drained will often feel tired all the time.
Okay.
They might be pale and they might lose weight. They
Yeah.
just generally feel weak and depleted.